My ex-boyfriend, who broke up with me 3 years ago, suddenly contacted me. He said, "The Cold War has lasted long enough. Let's get back together." I replied, question mark. He asked, "What have you been doing during the time I wasn't around?" I turned my head and glanced at the little baby beside me. Then I typed a few words on my phone, "I'm in confinement." 01 Asher smashed the window of my house. With a loud crash, pieces of broken glass scattered all over the floor. The little baby, who had just finished drinking milk and was about to go to sleep, was startled and immediately puckered her lips and burst into tears. She was babbling, looking extremely aggrieved. I quickly protected the baby and moved her a bit further away from the window. I was afraid that Asher would continue to go crazy. And if he threw another stone in, it might hurt her. After protecting the baby well, I carefully looked through the broken glass at Asher standing downstairs. 3 years had passed in a flash. He didn't change much in appearance. He was still strikingly handsome. At most, he just looked a bit more mature than before. He was wearing a suit and a tie, looking all dressed up. It's a pity that I don't like men in suits. When we were together before, he always wore a white shirt. With the carefree look of a young man, that was my favorite appearance of his. I liked him so much that just one glance at him would make my heart flutter with joy, and then I couldn't fall asleep all night long, with his image filling my mind. It's a pity that things had changed now. Violet, I know you're inside. Could we meet? Asher was looking around. While I was lost in my thoughts, he suddenly raised his eyes and saw me hiding behind the curtain. He put his hands in the shape of a trumpet and shouted. I made a miscalculation. I forgot that Asher had excellent eyesight. Now there was no way to hide. 02 I knew Asher's personality very well. He was decisive and stubborn. When we quarreled, he could keep a straight face and not contact me for 3 months. But he could also be so stubborn that he would stay downstairs at my house all night long. One day after those 3 months, just to make up with me. So this time when he came, if he couldn't see me, he probably wouldn't leave easily. He would have to pay for the broken glass anyway. Moreover, if I didn't send him away, Anderson, that jealous guy, would be angry when he came back and saw this, and then I would have to coax him. What a headache. I simply handed the baby, who had just been coaxed to sleep, to the confinement nanny, and then wrapped myself in a thick padded coat and went downstairs. The weather wasn't that cold. It's just that I hadn't finished my confinement yet, so I still needed to be careful. Violet, you've finally agreed to see me. Asher smiled as soon as he saw me and wanted to reach out to hug me, but the moment he stretched out his hand, I quickly stepped back. We broke up a long time ago. It's not appropriate to hug each other. I had lived here for over a year, and the old men and women in the community were all on very good terms with me. If they saw us and told Anderson, that jealous guy, I would be in trouble. Asher slightly frowned but finally listened to what I said. He withdrew his hand and then took out his phone, pointing at the page of our newly added WeChat. Violet, what's the meaning of this? He was referring to the content of our WeChat chat. I thought for a moment. 5 days ago, someone suddenly added me on WeChat. There was no name, and the profile picture was completely black. However, thinking that those who knew my WeChat were usually people I was quite familiar with, and fearing that someone might contact me for something important, I accepted the friend request. I sent an emoji of hello to the other person. But the other person didn't reply. I didn't continue to ask and just put it aside and ignored it. I even forgot about it quickly. Until the night before last, the baby spat up milk and soiled my favorite piece of clothing. Feeling sad, I posted a moments to complain a little about the baby dirtying my clothes. The comment section was harmonious. Everyone was praising the baby as cute, and a small number of people also felt sorry for my clothes. After all, it was quite expensive. I just took a quick glance at the comment section and replied to a few friends who were closer to me, and then put my phone away. As a result, that night I received a message from the other person saying, "I'm Asher." This was the first time we had contacted each other again after breaking up for 3 years. Seeing this name again, I actually had an illusion as if a lifetime had passed. It seemed that our first communication also started with this sentence. He coldly sent me a message saying, "I'm Asher," and I was so happy that I couldn't sleep for days. Bonnie, my friend who lived with me, said that I was crazy. For a message from a man, I actually didn't sleep in the middle of the night and went to Dance Square Dance instead. I said she didn't understand and even gave her a little lecture. Adding WeChat with my male god was the first step. I would gradually get closer to him and finally become his girlfriend. And then, become his wife. I was so confident back then. I was young and beautiful. And I had an enviable good job. At that time, I always confidently believed that I was excellent enough to become his girlfriend. It seemed that I succeeded, but also seemed that I failed. Even Bonnie later felt that it wasn't worth it for me, having liked such a scumbag for so long. Violet, I really feel sorry for you, but I also think you were really blind. She had a sharp tongue, but what she said was quite fair. Asher was the person I fell in love with when we were in college. We both participated in the same competition, but I didn't make it to the final and was eliminated halfway. On the contrary, Asher advanced all the way and won the championship of the national competition for our school with an overwhelming strength and became a famous figure in the school for a while. It was a bit childish, but he really had that strength. At that time, when he was standing on the stage to receive the award, I was watching him from the audience. All the lights were focused on him. I don't know who said that liking someone requires the right time, place, and people. Falling in love only happens in an instant. For example, that time when he received the award, countless lights were focused on him. The young man was wearing a simple and clean white shirt, holding the trophy high with both hands. His eyebrows and eyes were full of the confidence and arrogance that a young man should have. It seemed that the whole world was under his feet. So I fell in love with Asher. There was no reason. Just that moment made my heart flutter, but he was aloof and indifferent. Although we were in the same school, because we were in different majors, we didn't have any interaction at all. And the time when I fell in love with him was also when we were about to graduate and were going to go our separate ways. At that time, I was still full of confidence. While busy with my graduation thesis, I still didn't forget to squeeze out time to ask people about Asher's news. It took me several people to find a junior fellow student. He told me that Asher had someone he liked. The girl was quite young, and the two of them usually could only contact each other by mobile phone, although they hadn't made it clear. Every time Asher mentioned that girl in the dormitory, his usually indifferent eyebrows would immediately become gentle. A young man in love had the girl he liked. This was the most common regret in youth. Maybe it was a bit sad, but I also had my bottom line at that time. Since Asher had someone he liked, I definitely wouldn't do something like stealing someone else's boyfriend. So I buried this love in my heart. Another 3 years passed. I still couldn't forget Asher, whom I liked when I was young. Later, I heard that the girl Asher liked had gone abroad a year ago, and the two of them broke up by default. Asher was very sad. I forced myself to be sad for 2 days, which was to respect his love. Then I used all my connections and managed to get his contact information from his college roommate. I carefully added him on WeChat. My hands were still trembling, and I hadn't thought about what to send him. Instead, he took the initiative to introduce himself first. I then used all his hobbies that I had collected over the years to start chatting with him tirelessly on WeChat. Bonnie was eating potato chips and looking at me huddled in the corner of the sofa, giggling while holding my phone. She couldn't help shaking her head. Just a man, and you're so happy like this? Was he an ordinary man? No, he was my male god. Then it took me a whole year to successfully chase after Asher. He was really hard to chase. He was as cold as ice. Bonnie knew that I was going to chase Asher, so she came over with a copy of The Little Wife of the Overbearing President to give me advice. According to the rules in novels, you should resign and go to his company, and then get along with him day and night, so that he will fall in love with you unconsciously. I raised my hand and knocked on her head. I liked Asher. I would be happy just at the mention of his name. But that didn't mean that I would lose myself. My current achievements were obtained with a lot of hard work, and I couldn't give them up for a man. I would look down on myself. Even if I loved him deeply. If you don't get along with him day and night, then how can you make him fall in love with you? Bonnie threw away the novel about the overbearing president. Then make yourself better and stronger, so dazzling that he can't ignore me and thus fall in love with me. In this way, I could get love and also wouldn't abandon the best version of myself. So I worked harder and made myself his most important business partner. Little by little, I integrated into his life. I told him that I loved him. The process was quite difficult, but fortunately, the ending was good. Finally, on that snowy day, Asher drank a lot of wine. His eyes were terribly red, as if he had cried. He held my face gently and carefully kissed me. He said, "I love you." Later, I found out that this "you" had never referred to me. 03 I pulled my thoughts back. Fortunately, the sadness from 3 years ago wouldn't continue until now. At most, I just sighed that things had changed. After reading all the chat content, actually, I didn't say much. After he introduced himself, I was caught up in memories and didn't have time to respond. Then he sent me messages on his own. He said, "The Cold War has lasted long enough. Let's get back together." I was completely dumbfounded. Was this a Cold War? 3 years ago, we had a big quarrel because of Coco. He said that I was being unreasonable and that Coco was just a sister he cared a lot about. Liar. She was clearly the girl he had liked before. It's just that because Coco was young and her parents found out about her relationship with Asher, they simply sent her abroad to study. Breaking up once going abroad seemed like an unchanging rule. Then I came to his side and spent a year accompanying him before he finally noticed me. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for Coco to come back. That lively and beautiful girl took away the most important thing in my life at that time with the most innocent gesture. Well, it was a treasure before, but now it's trash. I, Violet, still had some pride. There was no way I would go back to pick up the trash. I directly replied with a question mark. I suspected that he had found the wrong person. As a result, he asked me again, "What are you doing now?" What was I doing? I turned my head and took a look at the little baby beside me. She had just drunk milk and was extremely happy. She was wriggling on the bed, with her chubby little hands stuffed into her mouth. I pulled her hands out, and she puckered her lips and hummed twice to show her dissatisfaction. She was so soft and cute. I kissed the baby and typed a few words on my phone. "I'm in confinement." I wasn't lying to him. I was really in confinement. It had been less than 20 days since I gave birth, and my body was still weak. It was really hard for me to go downstairs to ask for compensation. But Asher didn't believe me and kept calling me crazily. The ringtone of the phone was too loud. I forgot to set it to silent, and it scared my baby into crying. I had to quickly block Asher. Nothing was more important than my peaceful life. That night, I was a bit touched, so when Anderson came back, I told him about this. It wasn't that I still had feelings for Asher. I just simply thought that Asher was a bit crazy. We had broken up for 3 years, yet he thought of me when I was in confinement and said he wanted to get back together with me. Did he think that these 3 years were just me being angry with him? I told Anderson about it as a joke. He didn't laugh at all. Then in the middle of the night, he stood beside my bed like a ghost, which startled me. He asked me, "Do you like me or Asher?" I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I pointed at the baby in the crib again. Isn't it obvious? If I didn't like him, I wouldn't have given birth to a baby for Anderson. How painful it was. Obviously, Anderson was very satisfied with this answer. He coaxed me to swear that I must never be soft-hearted towards that scumbag again. "Violet, Asher is not a good person. Let's not pay attention to him anymore, okay?" Anderson was just like a child. I didn't say anything, and he kept pulling my arm and shaking it. He almost woke the baby up. Being pestered like this, I had no choice but to block Asher's WeChat in front of him. Only then was Anderson satisfied. But who would have thought that the next day Asher actually found my house and smashed my window with a stone? Really, I'm going to ask him to pay for it. I had the glass specially replaced for the arrival of the baby. It was so expensive. We've only been apart for 3 years. You used to love me so much. How could you have a baby for another man? It seemed that the last few words were a bit hard for him to say. It took Asher a long time to say this sentence. I was both angry and amused. Why can't I have a baby? Besides, I did love you before, but that was in the past. It's been 3 years ago. Is there any point in dwelling on it now? As the saying goes, the past is gone and can't be chased back and the road ahead is. What was it? I didn't remember the words very well after watching Empresses in the Palace at noon. Anyway, one sentence. What's past is past. It's really meaningless to keep entanglement.ing. I don't believe it. You used to love me so much. How could you have a baby for another man? I think Asher has gone crazy. He grabbed my arm, then tightly held my shoulders and directly pushed me into a corner. Actually, seeing this face up close again, I was a bit distracted. After all, it was the most sincere love in my youth. And it was also the memory of my youth that I could never get back after losing it. I just don't know why. Now that he was questioning me with red eyes, he didn't have the calm and confident look he had when he was a young man. I felt a bit strange. It seemed that I couldn't remember the young Asher who liked to wear a white shirt. Asher pinched my arm so hard that it hurt. I was a bit unhappy. But I couldn't get angry because it was very bad for my health. So I tried my best to suppress my anger. I wanted to push him away with my hand, but I couldn't move him. Asher, you have to face the fact that we broke up 3 years ago. 3 years can change a lot of things. For example, I can forget you and fall in love with someone else. In the end, we'll have an extremely cute baby. I'm living a very happy life now. I can be happy without Asher. After I said this, he was silent for a long time. A teardrop slid down from the corner of his eye. His eyes were full of panic and hesitation, but he still shook his head on his own. I don't believe it. We just had some conflicts before. I just wanted to give you some time to calm down. Violet, I've never said that our relationship was over. So you're still my girlfriend? For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Wouldn't it be nice to break up gracefully? At least like this, he would still be the dazzling young man in my memory. Before I could even scold him with these words, a fist flew towards Asher's face. There was another loud crash. I was startled. Asher was caught off guard and was directly knocked to the ground. I immediately jumped out and then threw myself into Anderson's arms. He looked a bit angry. I could only take the initiative, I really didn't contact him. But he smashed our baby girl's window. I came down to ask him to pay for it. The window is broken and can't be repaired. Of course, he has to pay for it. Although, I haven't had time to mention this yet. Don't be afraid. I'm here. Anderson smiled fondly, touched my head, and then took my hand and protected me behind him. He always thought that girls were the ones who needed to be protected. Although I always argued with him that I was also very capable and could protect him too. But Anderson wouldn't listen. What are you doing here? I'm here to see my girlfriend. What's it got to do with you? Asher got up from the ground, his eyes also fixed on the hands that Anderson and I were holding tightly. That look in his eyes made it seem as if I had cheated on him. Fortunately, I didn't bring the baby down. I was afraid that he would go crazy. Violet is my wife now and the mother of my daughter. She has nothing to do with you at all. Anderson lowered his head and kissed my forehead, declaring his sovereignty. Yes, yes. I quickly nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. Asher stood there silently for a long time. He was so silent that for a moment I thought he would give up and leave, and then go to live happily with his Coco. But he didn't. Instead, he walked straight towards us. It seemed that he wanted to come to me. Anderson blocked him. Asher, don't be so cheap. You pushed Violet away for another woman before, and now you're pretending to be a sentimental person. How interesting. Asher laughed. That smile was so contemptuous. Another woman? I'm pretending to be a sentimental person? Anderson, what makes you so good? 3 consecutive questions. With full contempt and ridicule. Once again before he could finish his words, Anderson punched him again. Whatever I've done is better than you falling in love with someone else. Anderson was extremely furious and directly pinned him to the ground and started hitting him. Asher was prepared this time and the two of them were evenly matched. I actually wanted to stop them from fighting, but I just didn't know where to start. The two of them were wrestling with each other and they were also cursing at each other. Asher, how much harm did you do to Violet because of Coco back then? It was all because of you that she almost died. Asher, who was originally at a disadvantage, suddenly jumped up when he heard this. Furious all over, he sat on Anderson and threw a fierce punch at his face. Anderson, what the hell makes you so good? You were the one who did that thing back then, and now you're pretending to be a good guy. Shut up. There was a roar full of panic. The expression on Anderson's face at this moment suddenly made me a bit scared. Was that thing done by Anderson? The memories that I least wanted to mention in the depths of my mind were falling apart at this moment. 3 years ago, Violet thought that she would definitely marry Asher. However, reality slapped me hard in the face. It really hurt. Without any warning, just the week before, Asher and I were still discussing where to go for our annual leave. He held me in his arms on the bed and said affectionately, wherever Violet wants to go, we'll go there. He always took great care of my feelings. His peach blossom eyes were already so affectionate, and I completely fell for his eyes. However, I was just on a business trip for a week. To give Asher a surprise, I deliberately came home a day earlier. As a result, at home, I saw another girl. That was the first time I saw Coco. This girl who only existed in rumors was a bit different from what I had imagined. She had short hair, a round face, and big eyes. When she smiled, her eyes curved, and she was a very lively and innocent little girl. There was no melodramatic scene of catching them in bed. She was sitting on my sofa, holding the little cat named Snowball that Asher raised, and there was a document on the coffee table. She was open and above board. When Coco saw me, she didn't show any panic at all. Instead, she smiled and waved at me. Sister Violet is back? I'm Asher's little assistant Coco. I came to give him the documents. He's cooking in the kitchen, and we can have dinner soon. She said it so naturally, but it made my heart skip a beat. Asher had never cooked before. When I first got together with him, we went to Bonnie's house. At that time, it was Bonnie's boyfriend who was cooking. I told Asher at that time, a man who can cook is really a plus. Almost no one can resist a man who is willing to cook for them. I was the same. But he just smiled gently and then reached out and pulled me into his arms. The kitchen has a strong smell of oil smoke. I don't like it. We can hire a nanny in the future so that neither of us has to cook. I didn't think much about it either. I just thought that Asher didn't like cooking and didn't want to go into the kitchen to get stained with oil smoke. Besides, both of our jobs were quite good, and hiring a nanny was the best choice. There was no need to cook by ourselves. Later, I got sick once. I nestled in his arms and acted coquettishly, saying that I wanted to eat the white porridge cooked by him, because Bonnie had shown off to me the porridge carefully cooked by her boyfriend when she was sick. Well, I was a bit envious. But Asher refused me without hesitation. I don't like cooking. Yes. He didn't like it. For a whole year, he hadn't gone into the kitchen for me even once. But now he was willing to cook for another girl. So it turned out that it wasn't that he didn't like cooking, but that he just didn't like cooking for me. For the first time, I began to doubt the love that I had been so sure of. When Asher saw me come back, a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes, but he quickly returned to normal. Why did you come back early? If I didn't come back early, how could I see you cooking in person? I said with a bit of sarcasm. He probably heard it too. He put 2 plates of dishes on the dining table, then took off his apron and walked to me. Coco has a stomach problem and can't go hungry. Ordering takeout is too slow, so I simply cooked 2 dishes for her. Asher said it so naturally. But I would rather he had been a bit evasive. At least that would prove that he had me in his heart and would feel a bit guilty. But the fact was not like that. He was so open and aboveboard that I couldn't even open my mouth to question him. It seemed that as long as I asked one more question, I would be a narrow-minded woman. According to the overbearing president falls in love with me that Bonnie had read, at this time, I should have gone hysterical, then swept all the food on the table onto the floor, and then questioned him, "Why are you treating me like this?" That would indeed be quite satisfying. But I couldn't do it. I was wearing a shirt worth 20,000 yuan. My nails were newly done. I had changed my hairstyle before coming back. I was very refined from head to toe. I didn't want to become a crazy woman in others' eyes because of emotional issues. I also didn't want to dirty my clothes and mess up my hairstyle after doing all these things. So we had this meal very calmly. It was so calm that Snowball, who usually loved to be noisy, obediently huddled on the balcony and ate its cat food. Asher, your cooking skills haven't changed at all. In a quiet atmosphere, someone would always break the silence first. Coco became the one who broke the atmosphere. She pointed at the sweet and sour spare ribs on the dining table and then gave Asher a thumbs up. After saying that, her face froze. Then she turned around and carefully stared at me, as if she had done something wrong, then she kept her head down and remained silent. I had just taken a sip of soup and was planning to continue eating. I didn't plan to say anything. Coco's face looked a bit awkward. Perhaps the atmosphere was really too strange. She didn't stay long either. After finishing the meal, she took the initiative to propose to leave. Before leaving, she looked at me, her innocent and pure eyes were full of apology. "I'm sorry, Sister Violet." I smiled. "Why are you saying sorry? Did you do something to apologize to me?" I stared at her directly with a straightforward look in my eyes. Coco was still a young girl who had just graduated after all. She couldn't withstand such an aura. She bit her lip, her eyes turned red, and then she left my house. Soon, only Asher and I were left in the room. 05 Coco was just a young girl who had just entered society. Asher was blaming me. The anger that I had tried hard to suppress surged up at this moment. I picked up the pillow on the sofa and threw it at his head. Even the words I said became harsh. Normal people wouldn't let their ex-girlfriends be their assistants. "Do you want to play office romance, Violet?" Asher, who had been relatively calm in mood before, suddenly roared. He stared at me fixedly. His peach blossom eyes, which I used to love the most, were filled with anger. He was angry because he thought that I had insulted his Coco. We had a quarrel. A strange and calm quarrel. I asked him to fire Coco. Having an ex-girlfriend as a little assistant was deliberately slapping me, his girlfriend, in the face. He refused, saying that Coco had risked everything to run back to the country and had a quarrel with her parents and had no financial resources, so she could only be a little assistant by his side. He also said, "Violet, you're the kindest. Coco is just a little girl who doesn't know anything. I just want to protect her like a friend. Just like protecting a little sister." What kind of sister would fall in love with him? And what kind of sister would make Asher still be so concerned about her until now? I hated this kind of sister who had no blood relationship the most. So I gave Asher an ultimatum. If she doesn't leave, I will. Although I was quite reluctant, cutting the Gordian knot is often the best solution. 06 I moved out temporarily. When Bonnie found out, she resolutely came to accompany me. After years of hard work in the city, I finally had my own house. So even in the face of such a situation, at least I wouldn't have to drag my suitcase and stay on the street all night in a mess. "So, you ate the food that Asher cooked for Coco?" Bonnie looked as if she hated to see me being so stupid. She even wanted me to spit out the food I had eaten. I had to taste what the food cooked by Asher himself was like. I wondered how delicious it was that Coco could eat it. Bonnie was successfully distracted by me and was left with only curiosity on her face. I shook my head. "It's not as good as what the nanny cooked." So what on earth had I been longing for all these years? Maybe because I never got it before, so in my imagination, it became especially good. But when I really got it, I found that it was just SOSO. Bonnie was confused. "What are you talking about? I don't understand." "I'm talking about how happy Bonnie is." I smiled and reached out to rub her head, then turned around and took my clothes to the bathroom. Just as I was about to take a shower, my phone dinged. It was a mobile phone MMS that was rarely seen. A photo was sent in the MMS. In the photo were Asher and Coco. Strictly speaking, it was them a few years ago. Asher's eyebrows and eyes were youthful and still had the immaturity of a young man. He was looking carefully at the girl he loved beside him, with love all over his face. As for Coco, she hadn't changed much compared to now. With short hair, a round face, and a sweet smile, she leaned her head on Asher's shoulder, also looking very happy. I stared at this photo for a long time and couldn't come back to my senses. Until the water in the sink overflowed and wet my favorite piece of clothing. I felt a bit sad. My phone dinged again. This time, a text message was sent, and it was a long one. They were together a few years ago and loved each other deeply. She swore to the sky. Coco also loves him and didn't hesitate to quarrel with her parents for him. They have each other in their hearts. So, could you please leave them alone? This anonymous text message made me feel ridiculous. I had always known that there was affection between them, but that was in the past. Who hadn't liked a few people when they were young? Even I had a secret crush on the class monitor in high school, so I didn't think it was a big deal. As long as Asher had me in his heart now, it would be okay. Besides, I'm quite rebellious. I didn't do anything wrong, so why should I give in? So I replied to the anonymous text message with 3 words, why should I? Because it was anonymous. I arbitrarily and viciously thought that it was sent by Coco. Even if I didn't want Asher, I couldn't admit defeat at this critical moment. But looking at another anonymous text message that was sent again, I sadly realized that I had been losing all along and losing so thoroughly. 07 Asher came to see me the next day. In this huge city, only this apartment truly belonged to me. Asher knew the location, so when I opened the door to throw out the garbage in the morning, I saw him standing at the door. He looked a bit scruffy. There was stubble on his chin that he hadn't shaved clean, and he was holding a bouquet of my favorite roses in his hand. Violet, there's really nothing between Coco and me. Please believe me again, okay? He sounded so sincere. From the reflection in his eyes, I could only see my own figure. It seemed that I was the only one in his heart. But in the end, it was just a trick to deceive people. I took out my phone and showed him the anonymous messages from last night. Before you broke up with her, you had set up an intimate payment method. Later, even though you were with me for such a long time, you still transferred money into it every month. Yes, the money is yours. What right do I have to interfere? But Snowball, you told me that it was a little kitten you brought from a friend's house and asked me to take good care of it. I believed you, but what happened? Coco asked someone to send it to you from abroad. There were only 2 pictures in the later anonymous message last night. One was a screenshot of the intimate payment. The other was a photo of Coco and the newly born Snowball. How ironic. I had been helping others all this year without knowing it. After reading the anonymous text messages, Asher, who had been relatively calm before, suddenly became nervous. He still wanted to open his mouth to explain to me and tell me that all of this was false. But the truth is the truth. With the evidence right here, it couldn't be denied. So in the end, Asher nodded silently. He still tried to hold my hand, but I slapped it away mercilessly. Violet, I love you very much. I've never doubted this and it definitely won't change just because Coco came back. I was wrong before. Could we go back to how we were before? Go back to before? To that past full of lies and despicableness? I slapped Asher. I told him to get lost. Violet really liked Asher. To the extent that just thinking about taking Asher out of her heart made it so painful that she could hardly breathe. But so what? So I unilaterally announced the breakup with Asher. 08 Bonnie said that I did the right thing. She also said that she wanted to heal my broken heart from the relationship and planned to take me to a bar. I refused her enthusiastic request. After all, I was quite busy with work. No company or boss would be willing to spend time and money to accompany me to grow. Violet, you're just too calm. I looked at Bonnie and seriously asked in return, isn't being calm good? It's better than being a lovesick fool who's desperate for love. Although I used to be a lovesick fool too, I would never be desperate for love. Otherwise, I would be sorry to my parents. And even more sorry to myself. After this unpleasant parting, Asher didn't come to see me for more than half a month. That was quite good too. Although I still felt a bit sad inside, at least I wouldn't become the person I hated the most. Violet, was the most decisive. Not really. Otherwise, I wouldn't have cried under the quilt in the middle of the night. It was quite spineless, so I definitely couldn't let Bonnie know. She would feel sorry for me. But maybe some things were just too coincidental. I felt that I was in a very bad mood, so I planned to take a vacation for myself, take a good stroll around, and calm down. As a result, as soon as I walked into the shopping mall, I saw Coco and Asher. They were in a shoe store. Asher was squatting halfway on the ground, personally helping her try on shoes. It was a very ordinary pair of white sneakers. Coco was supporting herself on the sofa with both hands, slightly lifting her feet, and then asked Asher, do they look good? Asher nodded, with an extremely gentle smile on his face. They look good. I looked down at my high heels. I remembered that half a year ago, because the heel of my high heel got stuck in a crack, Asher took me to the shopping mall to buy shoes. I took a fancy to a particularly beautiful pair of high heels. But he pointed at a pair of white sneakers and said, you'll look nice in these. They were nice, but they weren't my style. So I didn't hesitate to refuse Asher. I liked him, but I wouldn't let him influence my preferences and style. Similarly, I had never restricted his preferences either. At that time, I saw a hint of regret in his eyes, but I didn't know why at that time. Now that I think about it, perhaps it was because when he was young, he had truly loved a girl who liked to wear white sneakers. It's a pity that I'm not that girl. And I definitely didn't want to be a substitute for that girl. I, Violet, am unique. They saw me. Asher's eyes were full of panic. He tried his best to explain to me. Coco's shoes broke on the way to work with me, so I accompanied her to the shopping mall to buy a new pair. Coco bit her lip, looked at Asher with red eyes, and then tried hard to raise a smile and looked at me. Yes, my shoes are broken. After saying that, she pointed at the broken shoes beside her, trying to prove it. You don't need to explain anything to me. It didn't matter anyway. But Coco held me back. Violet, can we talk? 11 Two women who once fell in love with the same man. Apart from talking about this man, it seemed that there would be no other common topics. Coco got straight to the point. I love Asher very much. Even during the years when I was abroad, I've always loved him. So what? So I hope you two can be together well. She stood up, with a firm look in her eyes. This surprised me a bit. I followed her words and said, but you're by his side. A qualified ex-girlfriend shouldn't show up again when there's already a current girlfriend. This is the unspoken rule. Coco cried. Big tears rolled down one by one. She said, but I have nothing now. I just want to stay by his side until I can completely forget him. So should I help you too? What are you crazy about, Coco? It was doomed to end unpleasantly. I just didn't expect that as soon as I got home, Asher would call me crazily. I didn't answer, and he actually drove over in the middle of the night. As soon as I opened the door, he questioned me. I didn't handle this relationship well. I'll accept whatever punishment you give me. But why did you bully her? I bullied Coco? Are you kidding? She couldn't figure it out, but this relationship was clearly Asher's fault. If I wanted to hit someone, I would only hit Asher. Coco said that I bullied her? Asher was silent for a moment. After you met her in the coffee shop, when she came out, her clothes were all wet. She was covered in coffee. So she didn't even say it was me who did it herself, but you already subjectively thought that I laid hands on your sweetheart? It was so ridiculous. And my heart hurt even more. The Asher I loved so deeply blamed me for another woman without even asking about the right and wrong. I was like a huge joke. I tried hard to calm my breathing and then pointed at the stairs. Get lost. Isn't it okay to break up gracefully? Do we have to make it so ugly? I, Violet, will never admit to something I didn't do. I drove Asher away. But when I closed the door and saw Bonnie's distressed eyes, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Violet, you still have me. Sometimes silence can make a person strong. But sometimes care can make a person break down in an instant. I cried all night long, wanting to cry out all the bitterness, as if only in this way could I become strong. I, Violet, definitely don't want to be a person trapped by love. But unfortunately, some people just don't intend to let me go. On my birthday, my friends all said that they would hold a grand birthday party for me. Although I wasn't in the mood, I couldn't resist the kindness of so many people. Especially since they had already arranged everything and all I needed to do was show up. So I still forced myself to cheer up, dressed up carefully, and then went to the appointment. The moment I pushed the door open, I saw Asher. He was holding a bouquet of brightly blooming roses. The moment he saw me, he was overjoyed. But when he met my cold eyes, he became cautious. Violet, I was wrong to blame you last time. I'm here to apologize to you properly this time. Could you forgive me, please? He was being extremely humble. So humble that for a moment, I doubted whether this man really had any true feelings for me. Many friends were cheering beside us. Violet, forgive Asher. Yes, yes. He has already fired Coco. There's no obstacle between you two anymore. This birthday party is also because he asked us one by one, saying that he wanted to ask for your forgiveness and asked us to come and help. Violet, it's really not easy to meet someone you love in life. Don't let yourself regret it for a lifetime just because of a small problem. Everyone said a sentence, and there were too many. So many that I could hardly remember them all. Bonnie didn't persuade me like them. Instead, she pulled a straight face and protected me behind her, and then scolded Asher, you know you're sorry now. What were you doing before? I'm wrong. I really know I'm wrong. Violet, forgive me. He even knelt down in front of me on one knee, staring at me expectantly. The box instantly became silent. It seemed that everyone was waiting for my final answer. Unfortunately, before I could answer, a sudden ringtone rang out in the box. It was Asher's cell phone. It was also a ringtone that I had never heard before. He was startled for a moment, then took out his phone. After hesitating for a second, he hung up the call. The next second, the phone rang again, sounding so urgent. Violet, I need to answer the phone first. I originally thought it was Coco, but it was a young man's voice on the phone, sounding very urgent, as if something terrible had happened. Because I was quite close, I could vaguely hear a few words. Coco, injured, hospital. Asher immediately threw away the roses in his hand and was about to run out directly. Bonnie blocked his way. Asher, you should think clearly. Once you leave today, you'll really have no chance with Violet. Asher stopped in his place and looked back at me. Wait for me to come back. After saying that, he turned around and left without hesitation. Those friends who had been speaking well of Asher just now all fell silent. After this incident happened, the birthday party couldn't go on naturally. Bonnie's boyfriend came back from a business trip. She was worried about me and planned to continue staying with me. But after all, this was my own business. I couldn't keep pulling her along, so after my persuasion, Bonnie went back to her own home. The KTV where the birthday party was held wasn't too far from my apartment. I simply walked home directly. But I didn't expect that the change would come so suddenly. When I was passing through a small alley, a man stopped me. He was drunk, with a lecherous look in his eyes. When I wasn't paying attention, he grabbed my hair and dragged me into the alley. I shouted for help desperately, but this place was a bit remote, and no one could notice at all. I struggled with all my strength. My cell phone fell out of my pocket. I tried my best to pick it up, wanting to dial 110, but I didn't have the time at all. In a panic, I could only call the emergency contact that I had set before. Asher. How ridiculous. 1 second I said that I would never see him again, and the next second I hoped that he could come to save me. The phone rang. Asher answered it. I cried and begged him to come and save me. The drunk man behind me had already torn off my coat, and the feeling of fear had completely occupied my whole mind. But what did Asher say? He said, Violet, don't make trouble. Coco is really in trouble. She's in the hospital. I'll come back to find you as soon as I settle her down. He didn't believe me. He didn't believe that I was really in an accident. He even thought that I was just being unreasonable and wanted to trick him into coming back by using this method. The moment the phone call was hung up, my heart sank to the bottom. The drunk man was still pulling me, and he even took out a knife from his pocket and threatened me not to move. At that moment, besides fear, there might have been a bit of sadness. So much so that I actually got the courage to directly reach out and grab the blade. It hurt so much that I was sweating all over, but I still tried my best to snatch the knife. I snatched the knife and slashed at him again and again like crazy until finally, someone heard the noise and came running over. And then they saw me covered in blood. Violet, I was wrong about what happened back then. I really thought that you just wanted to make up a reason to make me go back to you. I didn't expect that you were really in trouble. 3 years later, Asher was full of apologies. But when talking about this matter again, I still felt cold all over. Anderson ran over and hugged me, gently stroking my back one after another. Don't be afraid. I'm always here. Yes, he's always been here. After that incident happened back then, it was Anderson who sent me to the hospital. My hands still have thick scars now, but at least I saved myself. But this incident still left me with a very serious psychological shadow. It was Anderson who had been staying by my side all the time, accompanying me to the hospital for re-examinations and accompanying me to see the psychologist again and again. Finally, I was able to recover and return to normal. And it also made me truly and completely give up on Asher. Then this heart that should have died gradually came back to life under Anderson's meticulous care. So I fell in love with Anderson. He had only me in his heart and eyes. Perhaps this time I really met the right person. So when I saw Asher again, maybe I was still a bit angry in my heart, but probably I didn't resent him anymore. After all, I had already found my own happiness. Even though I had to go through so many hardships. But Asher laughed. He pointed at Anderson and laughed crazily. If I just betrayed Violet in terms of feelings, then you are the one who almost took her life for real. Asher, shut up. What do you mean? Asher's madness and Anderson's panic, what did it all mean? Asher's eyes were red. He swung his fist and punched Anderson in the face. Unexpectedly, Anderson didn't fight back. Don't say it. I beg you not to say it. The anger in Anderson's eyes disappeared bit by bit, and finally only full of pleading was left. But Asher pushed him away and then slowly pieced together another fact for me. 15 The anonymous messages that stirred up our feelings were sent by Anderson. The cup of coffee was also splashed by Anderson. Even that drunk man in the alley was found by Anderson. One sentence after another. Asher, what crazy things are you talking about? I shook my head and stepped back, unwilling to believe Asher's words no matter what. Anderson had been really nice to me. He had been by my side for 3 years, and I couldn't even find a single fault with him. How could he have hurt me like this? He had no reason to hurt me. I didn't believe it. The baby upstairs seemed to be crying. The confinement nanny was holding the baby and looking over through the window, probably asking me to go back. Asher pointed at Anderson and said, because Anderson is Coco's cousin. He wanted to stand up for his cousin, so he wanted to break us up. He even deliberately concealed what happened to you at that time, making me think that you were just throwing a tantrum and wanted to have a cold war with me. It wasn't until I went to Coco's grandmother's house and saw her grandmother take out your wedding photo with Anderson. She asked me if you two looked good together? Huh. What a match. I didn't love Asher anymore. But now that he was standing in front of me and said these words himself, coupled with Anderson's panicked look, I had no reason not to believe it, so I slowly turned my head to look at Anderson. Did you really do these things? Probably because of the existence of the baby, subconsciously, I still wanted to argue for him, but Anderson was silent. I'm sorry, Violet. My heart hurt so much. My whole body hurt. The psychologist told me before that I couldn't get angry or have too extreme emotions, so I had been trying hard to control my temper in the past 2 years, but at this moment, I was shaking with pain all over. Violet, I'm sorry, really sorry. At first, I just wanted to separate you two. I thought you were the third party. So I just wanted to break you up. That drunk man was just meant to scare you. I didn't expect that he would really do it. I also didn't expect that you would be so seriously injured. I'm truly sorry. Anderson tried to hug me again, but I pushed him away, then I raised my hand and slapped him hard in the face. Anderson, you make me feel even sicker than Asher. 16 Asher said that the misunderstandings had all been explained clearly and asked me to give him another chance. Why did you go to Coco's grandmother's house? I asked him, and once again, he visibly panicked. Coco was being urged to get married and asked me to be her shield. There's really no other meaning, and there won't be any other contact in the future. You see, people are just so cheap. They can't let go of the moonlight they've always cherished in their hearts, nor can they forget the cinnabar mole they once loved deeply. So in the end, he would still be affected by everything related to the moonlight, and he would still be thinking about the cinnabar mole who planned to abandon him. Wanting everything, unwilling to give up anything. Asher, you're so greedy. 17 I divorced Anderson. He begged me, saying that he was the one who had done everything wrong at first, that he had fallen in love with me when we were in the hospital, and that since we already had the baby together, we couldn't let her grow up in a divorced family. So what? I looked down at the baby. Should I compromise for the sake of the child, then bury all the things that you hurt me with in the past deep in my heart, and then live a loving life with you? I shook my head. Anderson, I can't do it. I can't reconcile with the shadow from 3 years ago, can't forgive the person who once hurt me, and can't continue to love someone who once tried to ruin me. Before, when I watched TV dramas, I really didn't understand the male and female protagonists who could still fall in love even though they had a feud of killing one's father. Could such hatred really be melted away by love? Now that it happened to me, the hatred wouldn't disappear. Instead, it would be engraved in my heart bit by bit with every day I spent with him. Every time I looked at him, it was like a reminder to myself, saying, Violet, look. You're actually living with a man who once tried to ruin you. It's really terrifying. This would be a nightmare for my whole life. When I came out of the Civil Affairs Bureau with Anderson, Asher was standing outside waiting for me. He was still holding the roses that I loved the most, wearing the white shirt that I fell in love with at first sight back then, and then he walked up to me and said, Violet, let's make up. I looked at him, at this man whom I had also loved for several years. Do you have to ruin the Asher in my memory? Asher's body stiffened. The young man in my memory was passionate and unrestrained. Wearing a simple and clean white shirt, he stood under the spotlight holding the trophy high. I fell in love with him at first sight and was happy for many years. But the young man in my memory completely disappeared at this moment. The baby in my arms started crying again. She smacked her lips, looking hungry. Bonnie was standing by the roadside, waving at me, asking me to come over quickly and go home with her. The sun was a bit scorching. There was a pair of students in school uniforms playing and joking around on the roadside. The boy was holding the girl by the back of her neck, and the girl was constantly patting his hand. This was their best time. Suddenly, the baby in my arms stopped crying, opened her eyes with effort, looked at me, and then smiled at me. I walked forward step by step with her in my arms. I never looked back at those two men whom I had deeply loved before.